It didn't begin the day the police came. It didn't even begin the day my sister decided to ruin me. It started long before that, growing in small, quiet ways. In my family, silence wasn't just the background noise. It was a tool, a shield, sometimes a weapon. There were 4 of us, parents who wanted everything to look perfect, and 2 daughters who grew up learning that perfection was more important than truth. My sister was always their star. She brought home ribbons, certificates, the kind of stories parents share at dinners with friends. I was the shadow, the one who learned to clean up quietly, keep my grades steady, ask for little, and expect even less. There wasn't open cruelty, just an endless current of small exclusions. When I tried to shine, it never fit the right moment or the right way. Her successes were family victories. My achievements faded into the next errand, the next meal, barely worth a word. I spent a lot of time alone. The house was never hostile, only cold in the way that makes you feel like a guest. My parents had a way of speaking about my sister that sounded like pride but felt like habit. If I ever mentioned something that hurt me, the room would go quiet, like I had broken some unspoken rule. In the quiet, I found company in my dog, Benny. He was the only living thing in that house that noticed me first. I fed him, walked him, taught him tricks no one else saw. He slept by my bed, followed me through the house, watched for my return from school. My sister lost interest in him quickly. She was good at loving things when it made her look good. I got the leftovers, and sometimes the leftovers are enough. Benny made it bearable, and when things got too heavy, I'd take him for a walk and end up at my grandfather's house. He was my lifeline, the only adult who never made me feel like I was taking up space he needed for someone else. High school passed quietly. My sister left for college. The house grew even quieter, a silence that had weight. My parents filled it with calls to her, worry about her well-being, relief when she returned for weekends and holidays. I tried not to mind. I learned to live inside myself. I watched my sister change. She was restless, bringing home new friends, taking long showers, spending more time behind closed doors. I noticed things no one else did. I didn't know if I should say anything. In my family, questions were mistakes. If something was wrong, the best way to handle it was to pretend it wasn't. It all came apart on a day that felt so ordinary I can't even remember the weather. There was no warning, no fight, nothing strange except for the sudden, hard knock at the door that made my heart trip. I opened the door and 2 police officers stood there. My parents were calm, almost rehearsed. My sister lingered at the edge, eyes blank, silent. The officers said they had a tip about drugs in the house. My mother guided them straight to my room, told them which drawer to open. It didn't feel real. I stood there as they pulled out a bag of pills I had never seen, listened to my parents say they had noticed me acting distant, spending time alone, not being myself. I tried to speak, but every word bounced off the walls. My sister didn't even blink. My dog watched, confused, tail wagging once, unsure what this was. I was handcuffed in my own hallway. My parents didn't look at me. My sister didn't say a word. I walked out of that house for the last time, escorted by strangers, and I felt smaller than ever before. The police car smelled like disinfectant. The street outside looked unchanged, as if nothing in the world had happened. I stared at my hands, wrists aching from the cuffs. I tried to replay the day to find the moment where it could have been different. I couldn't find one. It was never about that day. It was about all the days before. In that cell, I realized my whole life had prepared me for this, not for the crime, but for being left behind by people who were supposed to protect me. The feeling was too familiar. I wasn't even surprised. That night, I thought of Benny sleeping alone, my grandfather waiting for a call, my parents probably cleaning the house, ready to erase the last traces of me. The holding cell was cold. The light never dimmed. It hummed overhead, sharp and artificial, flattening every shadow until the corners disappeared. I sat on the narrow bench and waited, not sure for what. There were no answers, only hours. My thoughts wandered in circles. I replayed my parents' faces, calm and deliberate, as if they were following instructions from some invisible guidebook. My sister's silence was louder than anything. I tried to make sense of it, but there was nothing left to make sense of. I'd already learned long before that confusion doesn't earn you any comfort. If you don't understand, you're left behind. They called me in for questioning the next day. The officer's voice was clinical, the questions flat. They showed me the bag of pills, asked if it was mine, asked about my friends, my habits, my schedule. I answered, careful and clear, but I could tell it didn't matter. The story had already been written for me. I was just a supporting character in a script someone else had handed over. I realized how little power I had. My parents' statements lined up perfectly. My sister's silence filled in any gaps. I could hear the judgment in the pauses. I could see it in the way no one looked at me for too long. I learned to stop expecting empathy from strangers. I was processed, fingerprinted, photographed, locked away again. No explanations, just the machinery of accusation grinding forward. There was one visit. My parents sat across from me in a room that could have been a waiting area in a hospital, except for the guard in the corner and the heavy door. They were polite, almost gentle, careful not to say anything direct. My mother asked if I was being treated well. My father said they'd sent some things for me, like I was away at summer camp. I wanted to ask them why, how they could sit there so calmly while my world fell apart. Instead, I listened as they explained how it would be better for everyone if I just accepted what happened, took responsibility, didn't make things worse. Their focus was on keeping the family safe. Not me, not the truth. My own feelings were irrelevant. I heard the words, but the meaning was always between the lines. Take the blame. Make it easy for us. Don't disrupt the order. I left the room feeling lighter, not because anything had improved, but because I finally stopped expecting rescue. The days blurred. I had nothing but time. I tried to remember the last time I had felt wanted, not useful. The moments that came to mind were always with Benny, with my grandfather, in spaces where I was allowed to exist without expectation. I thought about what would happen to Benny now. I knew my parents wouldn't keep him. He was just another inconvenience to be managed. The idea hurt, a sharp and simple ache. I pictured him sleeping by the door, confused by my absence. It made me angry in a way nothing else had, not at him, but at the system that let people become disposable. I wondered if my grandfather knew, if he'd heard the story that was being told about me. I didn't know what he believed. I didn't blame him for doubting. Years of being overlooked teach you not to expect anything from anyone, even the people who love you. A lawyer came to see me. She was young, brisk, all business. She spoke with the confidence of someone who hasn't had to prove themselves yet. She said she'd talked to my parents, reviewed the evidence, and wanted to know if I had anything to add. I almost said no. Then I remembered the camera, the old stuffed bear with the blinking red light, the one I used to keep an eye on Benny when I was gone. It was aimed at my dresser, had a memory card that recorded everything. I hadn't thought about it in a daze. It was the only thing in my life that might still be mine, something unplanned, unexpected, not yet erased by someone else's version of events. I realized if I didn't act fast, that proof could disappear too. I used my one call to reach my best friend, explained where to find it, what to do. I didn't know if it would work, if the footage would be clear, if it even mattered. But I had to try. Sometimes all you can do is hold on to the last thread. Waiting for news was its own kind of punishment. Every hour stretched longer than the last. I imagined all the ways it could go wrong. The camera erased, the card missing, my parents finding out before my friend could get there. The fear wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about being erased, about never having a chance to tell the truth. I had to accept that whatever happened next, I would survive it. I'd already survived worse. For the first time, I felt something close to resolve. I wasn't going to let them finish the story for me. Even if no one else believed me, I owed it to myself to try. The waiting was relentless. Hours folded into each other in the blank white light of the cell. I watched the walls, counted the cracks in the floor, traced the pattern of the paint that had chipped away where too many hands had leaned against it. I wondered if my parents slept well at night, if my sister's silence weighed anything at all on her mind, if Benny waited by the door or if he'd already stopped hoping for my return. My grandfather's number was etched into my memory, but I had no way to reach him. I thought about what he might say, if he would believe the official story or recognize the version of me that had always shown up, always been there even when it didn't matter. The idea that he might doubt me hurt more than the cell, more than the handcuffs, more than my parents' indifference. A message came from my lawyer. She told me they had the footage. She didn't show it to me. She only described it, her voice steady, eyes level. My sister on camera, moving through my room, opening my drawer, slipping a plastic bag inside, face carefully composed, time-stamped, deliberate. The evidence was clear. For a moment, I didn't feel relief. I felt empty. It wasn't about winning. It was about all the years leading up to this one moment where the truth was finally visible, but only because I had accidentally left a piece of myself watching the world go by. The camera I'd bought for my dog, the tool that let me feel less alone, was now the thing that kept my life from being rewritten. I thought of all the times I doubted my own reality, convinced myself I was overreacting, that nothing was wrong except my own perception. Now the evidence was there, and all I felt was tired. My lawyer scheduled a meeting with my family. It was clinical, official, not a reunion. The courthouse room was beige, the kind of place built for bureaucratic suffering. My parents sat on one side, my sister beside them, her hands hidden, her eyes on the table. I sat with my lawyer, arms folded, trying not to expect anything. When the footage was played, my mother turned pale. My father stared into the laptop like he could force the outcome to change if he just wished hard enough. My sister shrank into herself, and for the first time, her silence looked like fear. The truth was too big to ignore. There were no more explanations, no more careful phrases to smooth it over. My parents' justifications tumbled out, but they were hollow. I listened to them talk about family, about protecting each other, about mistakes, but none of it was about me, not really. It was about keeping the surface intact, even now when the cracks were impossible to ignore. After the meeting, the official process shifted. The charges against me were dropped. My sister confessed. The story, now public, was smaller than the reality. I became a file, a headline, a lesson for others. My parents' involvement became part of the record, not the narrative. They lost more than time. They lost the image they'd tried to maintain at any cost. My sister's punishment was real, but less than what she'd given me, 2 years, maybe 3. My parents faced their own consequences. I watched them as their world collapsed, but I felt no triumph. There was only a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the story wasn't completely stolen, that the version of events I remembered was no longer just mine. When it was over, there was no apology. My parents left the room before I did. My sister couldn't look at me. I felt untethered, not just from them, but from the idea that I needed their acknowledgement to be real. It took a long time for that feeling to settle in. It was like discovering an emptiness where something painful had always been, but now it was just space. I learned that the absence of pain isn't always happiness. Sometimes it's just the beginning of something you haven't named yet. I moved in with my grandfather. The yellow house with creaking floors became my world. Benny was waiting for me, older, slower, but still mine. My grandfather never asked me to explain. He poured tea, made sandwiches, and left the space for silence to fill. For the first time, I felt seen without having to perform, without having to fight for attention. The house became my recovery, my shelter from everything that had come before. I cleaned, repainted, made the spare room into my own. I started school again, slowly, online at first, then at the community college. I chose criminal justice, not out of revenge, but because I wanted to understand what had almost destroyed me. I wanted to help others who might never have a camera or a witness on their side. My life narrowed and deepened. The world outside became less urgent, less demanding. I learned that healing wasn't a single moment of release, but a slow series of choices. Some days the past felt closer and the old ache returned. But most days, I found peace in routine, in Benny's loyalty, in the steady kindness of my grandfather. I learned to live in the quiet, not as a shadow, but as someone who mattered. And in that silence, I finally started to believe that my life was my own. Time after everything moved in unpredictable ways. The relief of exoneration did not feel sharp or immediate. It was more like exhaustion settling deep into my bones, mixed with the numbness that follows prolonged fear. I lived at my grandfather's house, where routines built new borders around my days. The house felt both unfamiliar and safe, with the kind of quiet that didn't demand anything from me. My grandfather didn't ask questions about the past. He simply made space for me at his table, shared his quiet company, and accepted that some things would take time to speak about, if ever. My parents stopped calling. There were no attempts to mend what was broken, no gestures to explain or apologize. I received letters only from lawyers, brief and cold, informing me about the fallout, assets frozen, court dates, sentencing schedules. My sister was gone, moved to a facility upstate. The public story was simple. She confessed to planting evidence, admitted to being pressured about the inheritance, accepted her punishment. My parents faced charges of their own, but the details felt distant, as if they belonged to people I used to know. I read the news articles, the short blurbs online, the speculation and commentary. It all felt surreal, as if someone else's life had been grafted onto mine. The practicalities of a new beginning took over. I learned to shop for groceries, to pay bills, to manage the quiet repairs an old house required. Benny became my constant companion, aging but faithful, his presence grounding me through each day's uncertainties. I started classes at the community college, choosing subjects not for their future utility, but for the way they pulled me out of myself. Criminology, psychology, ethics, courses that taught me about the machinery that had once threatened to swallow me. I studied at night, made lists, completed assignments, and tried to rebuild a version of myself that wasn't defined by what had been done to me. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I would remember moments from before. My mother's measured voice, my father's silence, my sister's calculated glances. Those memories didn't fade, but they lost their power to wound. I wondered if any of them ever thought about me, about what they'd done, about what they'd lost. I doubted it. My grandfather rarely brought up the subject, but one evening he quietly told me he'd changed his will. The inheritance was safe, placed in trust where no one else could touch it. He said he did it because I was the only one who ever showed up when there was nothing to gain. The gesture mattered, but not for the money. It was the recognition that someone had seen me all along. A letter arrived in the mail, addressed in my sister's handwriting. I left it unopened in a drawer. I had no desire to revisit the past or to read explanations or apologies that could never make things whole again. My parents sent nothing, not even on holidays. The legal notices from their lawyers grew fewer as time passed. It became clear that the only relationship left between us was official, documented, unfeeling. I did not mourn its loss. What I grieved was the version of myself who had once tried so hard to belong, who had once believed in the security of family. Each morning, I created small rituals, walking Benny, making coffee, reading a chapter from a textbook, calling my grandfather at work if I needed advice. I let myself be present in the world I was building. Healing was not dramatic or sudden. It was found in the ordinary, in consistency, in the feeling that I had survived something designed to erase me. I discovered that safety was possible, that peace did not require forgetting what had happened, only learning to live beyond it. Some nights, when sleep would not come, I thought about what might have happened if I had not remembered the camera, if I had not called my friend, if I had not fought for the truth. The possibilities were endless and terrifying. I would remind myself that I did fight, that I did survive, and that survival meant more than simply enduring. It meant building a life that was my own, even if it looked nothing like the one I'd been promised. The first signs of stability were almost invisible. Days passed without incident. My grandfather's house became familiar, its quirks and creaks no longer reminders of displacement, but signals of belonging. I created routines that no one interrupted, set my own boundaries, found value in predictability. My world shrank to what I could control: study, chores, walks with Benny, dinners in silence or with quiet conversation about weather and groceries and plans for the garden. Nothing about this life was extraordinary, and that was its greatest relief. There were moments when the past tried to intrude: an unexpected envelope from a lawyer, a mention of my parents in the local news, the sight of my sister's handwriting on a piece of mail. Each time, I felt a tightness in my chest, an instinct to prepare for loss or betrayal, but the waves passed more quickly as the months went by. I learned to set these reminders aside, sometimes unopened, sometimes discarded, unread. The distance between us grew wider, not just in geography, but in intention. I stopped expecting them to reach out, stopped waiting for explanations or apologies that would never arrive. What remained of our relationship existed only in paperwork and memory. School became more than a distraction. It became a path forward. I invested myself in my classes, determined to understand not just what had happened to me, but the broader systems that allowed it. I read about justice, about failures of institutions, about the ways truth could be obscured by power or habit or indifference. My classmates were mostly younger, but I found camaraderie in shared purpose rather than shared age. The teachers, sensing my seriousness, offered guidance without prying into my reasons. I was grateful for the space to grow without having to recount the details of my story. Benny aged quickly that year. His muzzle grayed, his steps slowed, but he remained steadfast. He greeted me at the door every afternoon, waited for me to finish studying before curling up at my feet. Sometimes I would sit on the floor beside him, letting his steady breathing soothe the nerves that still lingered just beneath the surface. He was a living reminder of loyalty without condition, a presence that had never judged, never turned away. When his health faltered, I sat with him through the long nights, administering medicine, whispering reassurance. The responsibility was grounding, a daily reminder that even after betrayal, care was still possible. My grandfather remained my anchor. He never pressed for details, never insisted on hope or forgiveness. His acceptance was quiet and unwavering. He let me set the terms of our conversations, let me withdraw when I needed space, let me speak when words finally came. Some afternoons, we would sit together on the porch, sharing silence, watching the neighborhood go about its business. He reminded me, in small ways, that family could be chosen by action, not just by blood. As the seasons changed, so did I. The pain of the past dulled, no longer sharp or constant. I could think about my sister without flinching, remember my parents without bitterness, burning at the edges of my thoughts. I wondered sometimes if they felt regret, if the choices they made haunted them the way their actions had haunted me. I would never know. The truth of our family had been exposed and then shattered. What was left was mine to define. I realized I didn't need to rebuild what had been destroyed. I needed only to build something different, something honest, however small. I began to trust the future, not with blind hope, but with cautious confidence. The world would never be safe in the way I once believed, but it could still be lived in, shaped, and even enjoyed. Each step forward was slow, deliberate, and wholly my own. After everything had settled, life didn't return to normal. It moved on, but in a different direction. One I chose, not one dictated by others. I lived with the quiet understanding that some doors close forever, and that's part of survival. My parents' absence became a fact, not a wound. My sister's silence was no longer a threat, but a boundary I respected. I stopped waiting for their approval, their love, or their recognition. I found freedom in not needing them, My days took shape in the spaces I built: classes, part-time work, quiet evenings with Benny and my grandfather. I focused on what was in front of me rather than what had been lost. Healing wasn't about forgetting or forgiving. It was about setting limits and protecting what remained of me. I learned that peace could exist without reconciliation, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. The inheritance my grandfather secured gave me something more than money. It gave me control, security, a future not tied to the past. It was a reminder that loyalty could be real, even when family failed. I didn't flaunt it or use it as a weapon. I kept it private, a quiet victory that belonged only to me. It was part of the life I was rebuilding, piece by piece. Occasionally, a letter from my sister arrived. I never opened them. I didn't need words from someone who had chosen silence for so long. I wasn't sure what I would do if she asked for forgiveness or tried to explain. I wasn't ready, and maybe I never would be. The idea of closure felt distant and abstract. Instead, I kept the letters in a drawer with other things I wasn't prepared to face. Benny grew older, slower, his health fragile. The day he finally passed was one of the hardest I'd faced. But even in grief, I felt grateful for the years he'd given me. Years of quiet companionship when I needed it most. I buried him in the backyard next to the rose bush my grandfather planted. I said goodbye without tears, only the steady rhythm of acceptance. His loyalty had taught me what true care looked like. I continued my studies in criminal justice, driven not by anger but by understanding. I wanted to be the person who could help those caught in systems, like the one that had nearly swallowed me whole. I wanted to make sure no one else had to face what I did without someone on their side. It was a purpose born from pain, shaped by hope, and carried forward with determination. The woman I am now is not the one who stood handcuffed in that hallway. I am stronger, quieter, more certain. I have learned that survival isn't just about making it through, it's about choosing who you become afterward. I have learned that sometimes the hardest battles are fought in silence, and the greatest victories are the ones no one else sees. If you are watching this, if you have ever been left behind by those who should have protected you, know that you are not alone. You don't have to disappear to be free. You can hold on. You can find your way. I am Emma. I am still here, and this time I'm not going anywhere.